Oh, hi. Welcome to the Verbal Diorama Time Machine. It's now 2020, but I know you're missing 2019. Not sure why, but I think you are. So let's go bleep, bloop, bleep, bloop and visit Neo Tokyo 2019. And while we're there, let's find some special guests. Are you ready? Let's go. Bleep, bloop, bleep, bloop.
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Verbal Diorama. And this is a very special episode. To be honest, I'm not sure what number episode this is because I haven't numbered the episodes going into January. But this is a special episode because I'm actually recording this at the end of November, and this is going to be the only episode that's been kind of recorded previously that I'm going to actually then sort of put out in the future. And it's a very special episode because I'm actually recording this in Peterborough, and I'm recording this with my special guests, which is the first time that I've actually recorded live with special guests. So it's really exciting for me because this is the first time I've not had to utilise Skype in any way, shape or form. We are live. We're currently at a place called SAMM's in Peterborough. So thank you very much to SAMM's in Peterborough for letting us have this wonderful space to record. There's a little bit of background noise, but it'll be cool. I guess the first thing that I need to do is welcome to my guests. We have Anita and Ciara from the Unexceptionals. Hi guys, you're
Hi. It's so nice to be here in SAMM's, Peterborough.
Yeah, that complete change of tone. Oh my god, it's so much fun to be here in SAMM's in Peterborough.
For all of your coffee/drinks/ podcasting needs.
Yeah! No, thank you so much for having us on your show.
Yeah, no, thank you very much.
Oh my God.
I'm excited.
It's so cool because we've actually had like a really cool day.
It's been lush.
We've been just hanging out and having a laugh. We've just been watching Baby Got Back videos with the with an orchestra. We've been dancing.
Yep.
We've been singing Annie Lennox.
Oh.
I mean, it's actually been a lot of fun. So we are pretty pumped up. We've got cake in front of us.
Yes.
We've got hot drinks. We were going to have shots, but we decided against it.
The staff here, who were very lovely at SAMM's, Peterborough, they were well up for us getting shots. And I was like, okay, let's maybe...
I'm like, are you sure you don't want a shot in your tea?
Ooh, Kahlua and tea would be lush. Kahlua, coffee syrup.
Yeah, it'd probably be better in coffee though.
Yeah, I would have
surely.
But it would make it even more, it's
gross.
Even more wretched. No, it'd be extra creamy and coffee.
Yeah.
I guess so.
Okay.
Yeah, might have to try that.
Find it at SAMM's, Peterborough.
Anita said I might have to try that, dead behind the eyes. Yeah, I might have to try that. Sounds great.
Yeah,
she's
moving swiftly on.
You did not see it. That's fine.
So, as you probably guessed from the title of this episode, we're going to be talking about the absolute animated classic Akira, or Akira, depending on however you want to say it. We're probably going to say it all the ways.
I'm Akira.
Do you know what? This is a really interesting thing because I gave Anita and Ciara a list. And I basically said, guys, choose whatever you want. And we had a couple of discussions back and forth. And Akira was chosen. And then I kind of said, because it was Anita who messaged me and said, we want to do Akira. And I was like, your name's like a portmanteau, Anita and Ciara is like a portmanteau of Akira. I was like, is that the reason?
I never even realised that.
And it was like,
what could it mean?
This is like destiny.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other Destiny bits that are going to come up when we start talking about Akira.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you take Anita and Ciara and you mush them together, not that I'm recommending that anyone does that, by the way, because that sounds a bit violent, but if you did, you would make Akira.
Yes! What a transition. And now, the film. Akira.
I know. SAMM's, Peterborough. So, So yeah, this episode's probably going to be a little bit different. There's probably going to be some slight kind of post-productional differences where I've kind of got to go off and maybe add some stuff in on post-production, maybe some additional bits and pieces. For example, what I've been up to, because to be honest, this episode's coming out in January. I don't have a clue what I'm going to be up to in January. So there might be a bit of a difference in the recording. But to be fair, we're having a great time with our cake and our potentially alcohol-laced tea and coffee. We're still not sure. So yeah, I don't know what I've been up to. I may add that in later. Who knows? I may not. So what I would normally do is I'd normally obviously introduce my guests, which I've done so, and I'd also kind of normally ask them like what they've been up to. But you know, obviously Anita and Ciara have to look into the future in like January and go, what are we up to in January?
It's a skill I'm working on, but I haven't quite mastered it.
You know, using the brain. I mean, obviously the movie Akira, there are very latent sort of telekinetic powers that we're talking about. So maybe we are more powerful than we think. But so what I thought I'd do is sort of talk to Anita and Ciara, obviously about Unexceptionals, because I wanted to obviously just kind of have a little bit of a chat with them about that. But I was basically quite curious because obviously with you guys, you do seasons of your podcast. So you've done season 1, sort of, obviously this is going out in January 2020. So last year you did season 1 of Unexceptionals. And obviously this year, as in 2020, you're going to be doing another season. And I guess why the choice to do seasons rather than continuous shows? Like, is there a reason for that?
I think from my side, it was just easier because we interview everyday people. It's easier. These people are, so we interview like NHS workers, mums, students, insurance workers, so they have quite unpredictable schedules, some of them, so it's easier to just record a bank of them and then release them gradually over time, so we have the time to, you know, get them in, interview them, and also because there's nothing I'd say like time specific about the interview. They're quite universal and timeless, so it's just kind of easier to release them in one go. I don't know if that's how...
Also, I think as well, like on top of doing our podcast, we both have other skills and other talents. God, I hate using the word talents. Other talents.
Pick yourself up, girl.
Oh my God. But there's other things that we do. So Ciara, for example, she does stand-up, and summertime is a particularly busy time for her. I'd say, you know, we've got things like Edinburgh Fringe, that it's like a whole month out of August completely that she's going to be really busy, and during that there's obviously loads of gigs that she's doing. You know, and I'm working on some of my own skills with drama and illustrating. So it just ended up we had to figure out a schedule that would work with us and that we could honestly keep up with. There was no point in saying, we'll release an episode every single week for the whole year, because in reality, the reality is we wouldn't be able to keep up with that. So we just had to like set very clear, honest kind of a schedule that would work with us, and that we know we deliver really good like stuff for, and hopefully we do deliver good stuff.
They do deliver good stuff. Okay, well, in that case then, I'm just going to kind of jump straight in, because I do like to just kind of ask questions of the people coming on the show and stuff like that, just so that anyone who listens to Verbal Diorama obviously can come and listen to like what you guys do. But so with the Unexceptionals, how did the idea of a podcast kind of come about? Like, how did you kind of just sort of think to yourselves, people are really interesting, let's talk about them?
Literally, yeah. But I think it was like we were both going through like a weird time with like jobs and things like that. So we were, I think, feeling particularly insecure. And when we were on social media and stuff, we'd come across like on our feeds these influencers, these people that you couldn't really necessarily relate to, because they felt like they were almost unattainable, like they were celebrities or they were influencers, and you had no relatability to them. And they were sharing all these cool things that they were doing in your life, and like I was feeling bad about myself when I was seeing this, and I was like, wait, there's so many people who are like me, who are doing really cool things, like why am I not hearing their stories? Because everyone has a story to tell. I'm just seeing these stories of people who I can't relate to in any way. And then we got chatting about that idea and like what it's like being on social media, and we thought, well, why don't we like make a podcast that maybe shares those everyday people's stories, so that on their feed people are seeing stories from people who are like them.
Yeah. I feel like at the time, it felt like imposter syndrome, particularly with social media, was quite a big topic as well. Because I remember reading, it was an interview with a journalist, and they'd said that as a journalist who writes articles about this kind of thing, they said she's still as affected by it as everyone else. You know, somebody who is really good at makeup, but then they watch someone on YouTube who has this expensive kit, you know, doing demonstrations, and think, I'll never be able to do that. She said she watched someone she knew, just as a result of being a journalist, win get nominated for a Pulitzer Prize or something, and she said she saw it on Instagram, and she said she felt like she was being glued to her seat, like just out of, you know, that sinking feeling of that's not me. And I feel like everybody feels that way, whether it's, you know, your respective profession, something you'd like to do, and it just felt like, as a result of this kind of glossy, you do get the kind of edited footage of someone's life on social media, and it would just be nice to have a podcast where you talk to everyday people who are really interesting. Everybody's interesting. It's like when you go to the pub and you get chatting to someone you don't know, and they have a really interesting story to tell, whether that's about something their mum said to them or what they did with their day. It would just be nice to hear that, because I feel like that's a bit less intimidating, but just as interesting. Yeah.
That was pretty much it, though.
Yeah. No, I genuinely find your podcast really fascinating because of that reason, because there are so many celebrity podcasts nowadays.
So many.
And
Gemma Collins.
And then celebrity?
Oh, God, so much shade, you guys. But yeah, and that's great. Like, in a way, it is really good because it's opening up podcasting to people who might, you know, Gemma Collins fans who might not even know what podcasting is. Now they know what podcasting is. And by extension, they might listen to her podcast and think, well, what else is out there?
Yeah, that's true.
But I think it's very much a double-edged sword, because all of these celebrities are kind of coming into podcasting now. But it's like, what about the little guy? What about, you know, the everyday people who are literally just, you know, working really hard, trying to make ends meet, you know, doing really good jobs, but then not Gemma Collins. Like, you know, what about those guys? And I think it is really interesting because you just get so much interesting information, you know, that you just wouldn't. Because I think you see someone and you just see like a person, but you don't see like their feelings, their emotions, their struggles, you know, what they had to go through to get that particular job or. So I find it completely fascinating listening to your podcast. I really do. So obviously, well, we can like proper like plug you guys at the end because obviously I want to do that. But obviously, we are here to talk about Akira. And to be honest, I will be completely honest in that I did not have a massive amount of time to prep for this episode. So I have some notes. I might have to add some additional stuff in post because I've just realised I haven't written down a plot summary.
Oh my God, brilliant.
Oh my God. So,
I have found one.
I've got the plot summary open in front of me.
Well,
do you want it?
Do you want to read it? Do you want to read the plot summary?
Yeah, I mean,
Is it a long one?
It's the long one, though.
I've got a synopsis that I got from...
Because I have it open to the names I knew I was going to struggle with, so I was like, get this open.
It's all right, I've got one. It's all right, I'll edit it out. Okay. So, we've got a little summary for Akira. So, in 1988, the Japanese government drops an atomic bomb on Tokyo after ESP experiments on children go awry. In 2019, coincidentally the year that we're recording this, 31 years after the nuking of the city, Kaneda, a bike gang leader, tries to save his friend Tetsuo from a secret government project. He battles anti-government activists, greedy politicians, irresponsible scientists, and a powerful military leader until Tetsuo's supernatural powers suddenly manifest. A final battle is fought in a Tokyo Olympiad, exposing the experiment's secrets. Normally I go through the cast. It's interesting to point out with this movie that there were actually 3 casts. So you had the original Japanese cast, you had the cast for the 1989 English dub, and you had the cast for the 2001 English dub. So I think we'd probably take a bit too long kind of going through all of the casts and everything like that. But character-wise, I mean, you've basically got a certain amount of main characters. So you have Kaneda, you have Kaneda? Yeah, that's right, Kaneda. It just sounds like the country. Tetsuo, and then you have Kei, Colonel Shikishima, and then you have a certain amount of test subjects who are numbered and named. So Akira is number 28, Kyoko number 25, Takashi number 26, and Masaru 27. And those test subjects are especially important to the plot of the movie. So the movie itself, came from the original manga. The manga was written by Katsuhiro Otomo, and he actually ended up writing and directing the movie as well. There's a writing credit on the movie as well for Izo Hashimoto. So normally at this point, I would go through the production history of Akira. But I don't have it. So what I'm going to do is, because with this movie specifically, normally as Verbal Diorama, I like to talk about the history and the legacy of the movie. But I think when we're talking about Akira, it's the legacy that is the most important thing, because this movie is kind of so integral to basically not only Japanese anime in general, because it was really the West's first introduction to anime, sort of outside of Studio Ghibli at the time. But just generally in its sort of scope and cinematic style, I mean, this is an incredible looking movie for 1988. It's landmark animation. It's the sort of animation that, well, you kind of wouldn't get nowadays, because obviously hand-drawn animation is a dying art.
Art, definitely.
It's absolutely fantastic movie. But I want to talk about the animation, because most animation is filmed in 12 frames per second. So every second you have 12 individual images. And there's a certain myth about Akira in that it was filmed at 24 frames per second, which is true to a degree, because the movie actually has a different amount of frames per second depending on what's happening on screen at the time. So, for example, when you've just kind of got scenes where, I was going to say actors, but they're not, they're characters. Characters are just kind of chatting. Those are filmed in 12 frames per second. And you can tell that there's not as much detail in those kind of scenes. When it switches to kind of a more action set piece, so for example the epic motorcycle chase, which is just looks phenomenal, that is actually when they increase it to 24 frames per second, because it's the sort of fluidity that you would get from a live action movie is what you get from these sort of the explosions, and when the kind of apocalyptic wave kind of goes through the city. It gives the movie this kind of feeling of clarity and crispness, which is it's really unparalleled, I think, when it comes to hand-drawn animation. And so really, that I just wanted to say, this is a movie that looks fantastic, but it's also a movie that contains some really interesting themes. There's obviously parallels with the Hiroshima bombing in this movie. It depicts the atomic bombing, or the supposed atomic bombing of Tokyo in 1988, and Tokyo is essentially reborn as Neo-Tokyo. But Neo-Tokyo is a very dystopian city. It's a very kind of grimy and grim city, and the people of Neo-Tokyo are not having the best time with their lot in life. There's a lot of rebellion going on. There's a lot of protests going on. There's a lot of government corruption going on. And it's a really interesting movie to talk about. But I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you guys is, we'll get it out of the way. Is there anything that you don't like about this movie?
It's hard to say, because obviously it's such a well respected, and it's kind of like a cult classic, really, Akira. As you mentioned, it's like, I don't think there's anything that I don't like about the film. The only thing I would say that when I watched it again, because I watched this years ago, I watched this the first time I think I was about 10, 11, I watched it. Maybe you shouldn't have been, all that gore and violence, but I'm fine. But yeah,
she says crying in the corner and rocking.
No, I watched it when I was really young, and I really loved it. And it was really interesting to watch it again, much older, and be able to take in everything that was happening. And the only thing that I would say, not that I didn't like, but maybe that was difficult for me, was sometimes was following the characters, because there's points when they're wearing very similar outfits, and it's hard to figure out whether is that Tetsuo, is that Kaneda? Because there's a point when they like and the lady characters, I think it was Tetsuo's love interest Tetsuo's girlfriend and Kaneda's love interest. There's a point when they are also in very similar clothing, and I think that was the thing that maybe sometimes I was like, wait, who am I following now? Who is this person that I'm looking at? But it was quite interesting because we were talking about this on the train with Kira. She mentioned about how timeless a lot of their outfits were, because this was obviously made in the 80s, and there's no like distinctively glaring 80s type attire, is there?
Occasionally on the girls, there's the odd thing where you go, ooh, that haircut's a bit... That looks like my aunt in, family photos. But, yeah, no, it's very...
it was set in the future, wasn't it?
Yeah, my mum said she watched a film where, in order to make it timeless, they put everyone in very unisex outfits because they figured in the future gender would be less of an issue. Interesting, as that's starting to unravel that idea. And I felt like this was sort of similar. The girls are in, like, quite high-riding skirts and stuff. But apart from that, it seemed like the people were in boiler suits. Like, obviously, they're motorcycle gangs, so you'd expect that. But there wasn't, like... On most people, I mean, some of the heavies were in kind of suits, which is timeless. All heavies wear big suits. The scientists were dressed like scientists. Everyone, the style was quite uniform. It wasn't... You didn't go, oh, God, that looks old.
I think that was good in making it timeless, like you said. But I think it made it difficult sometimes to distinguish what character I was following, because there were very similar haircuts and things like that. But yeah, that was the only thing. And I wouldn't say that's a thing I hate or anything.
Yeah, I think with a movie like this, you can't possibly say, well, I hate this part of the movie.
No.
Because it is so iconic and it is so well done. And I think it's a movie that also benefits from multiple viewings, because when you're talking about a movie like this, which is based on a manga, the manga is 6 volumes. Yeah. And I believe as well that the manga wasn't finished before the movie was finished. So they basically took the first edition and the final edition, and that's basically the content of the movie. So there are basically 4 editions of the manga that are kind of missing from the movie. But I kind of feel a little bit like they've obviously got a great... The movie starts so iconically, and obviously the end of the movie. But the only thing I would say is I think it suffers a little in the middle, because it kind of has all of these little plot points, with the government stuff, and when they're in the sewers and everything like that, and it kind of wants to go somewhere, and it just kind of doesn't quite get there. It's like, we know there's some sort of government conspiracy, or that the government are hiding something, but it never really kind of delivers. But that is like a really minor gripe for me. It's
that was similar issue with me as well. Is there's this whole bigger social point about corrupt government and how people behave when they don't trust their government. I thought that was so interesting. And towards the end, I have a pet peeve, which is loud crash bangy fights, and there was lots of flying through the air, and the end. It's kind of ambiguous what happens. I don't know. Just it got very. What I will say is I had a really bad migraine when I watched the end of this, and all the kind of swelling and bulging and bright colours. I just thought, this is too much.
Did you kind of feel like, this is what's going on in my head right now?
Yeah. There was one bit...
It's a visual representation of my brain.
Literally. When Tetsuo starts swelling, I remember at that point I thought I might vomit. So,
Well, the thing is it's very kind of visceral imaging, isn't it?
It is,
really.
And the animation is so good when he's kind of reached the point. Obviously, we're kind of skipping to the end a little bit, but when he's kind of sitting on that kind of concrete throne, and you have all of these like
the wires
coming out. And
that was so cool. I really like that bit.
The thing is, it's so visceral because your brain is just like instantly like, oh my god.
And
then obviously when you get that mutation,
like the flesh just spilling out, and you're just like, oh.
But the most fascinating part about the animation style is that was all, I think they probably did use computers to kind of help guide the animators as to where to go, but otherwise that was all kind of hand-drawn, so every kind of little string of wire that kind of, when he's like reattaching his arm, and it's just like the way the arm, it's just, honest to God,
this is what I love about hand-drawn animation. And not to say that computer-generated animation does not have the same level of skill and artistry. It's amazing. I would love to be an animator. That's my dream job. but something about hand drawn, like you can see it. There's just there's an edge to it that you just can't replicate when it's computer generated. You can just see every single step that's been drawn because it's not perfect, which is the thing.
Exactly. Yeah, there's imperfections in hand drawn animation that you just don't get.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, anyone who listens to this podcast knows that I'm just the biggest fan of animation, just as you know, in general. But hand-drawn animation is so special, and this is one of the most perfect examples of how wonderful animation can be, and how all-encompassing it is. I distinctly remember mentioning in the Iron Giant episode that I always get a bit peeved when people call animation a genre, and they say, "Oh, well, my favourite genre of movie is animation," you know, and that's great because I'm glad that they appreciate animation enough to say I love it. But Akira is proof, if any is necessary, that the themes, especially you mentioned the mature themes, you know, there's quite a lot of blood and
violence,
gore and
nudity.
You have exposed breasts, and I mean, I think it's 15 rated, so you know, it's very mature themes that it's talking about. But the fact that an animation can do that and successfully portray that is another reason why I still stress that please don't call animation a genre, because animation can encompass any genre. You know, this is classic
it's
kind
like
of
a film style, really, isn't it?
Exactly.
You can choose to tell your story via like live action, or you can choose to animate it.
Yeah, well, interesting. We're going to talk about live action a little bit later. But yeah, this is one of the reasons why animation is so wonderful, because it can take this kind of dystopian, sci-fi, futuristic world with these powers. I mean, you know, superheroes nowadays, 10 a penny, you know. Literally pretty much every movie that comes out is related to superheroes in some way. But when this movie came out back in 1988, there was no superhero boom. But this movie is so reminiscent of sort of the movies that have come out recently, you know, where people are discovering they have power and how they deal with that power.
Yeah.
But, you know, we can obviously talk a little bit about specific characters. I really just kind of want to, because there are quite a few characters in the movie, I kind of just want to concentrate on Kaneda and Tetsuo. Yeah. Because they're kind of our main sort of antagonist and protagonist, really. Actually, it's the other way around. But they have a really interesting story because they obviously met in an orphanage, and we don't know the reasons why they were orphaned or why they were given up as children, but they've not had the best start in life. So we can kind of take from their behaviour at the start of the movie. They're obviously in a biker gang. They are misbehaving youths. They're not interested in school. But then it seems like the system in Neo Tokyo isn't really set up for an education. It doesn't really see any value in these young people because it's quite clear that there's obviously other things going on in Neo Tokyo that the government is more focused on than the education of the youth. So the youth kind of feel like they have nothing and that they don't deserve something. And I think that kind of, you can see that from where you've got Tetsuo, for example, who's clearly got a lot of anger and a massive inferiority complex.
Right,
comes across,
because he has this friendship with Kaneda, and whereas Kaneda is, this very kind of rebellious, egotistical, you can kind of see in their relationship that Kaneda is kind of more of the, I want to say boss, but he's kind of the leader of the group.
He's got the fastest, best bike.
And obviously the iconic red bike. I mean, there are certain visual styles in this movie that are completely iconic, where you've got like the red bike with Kaneda and the sort of red suit with the capsule on the back. I mean, it's kind of iconic imagery, really. But yeah, we can kind of see scenes with them together, and Kaneda is... Obviously, he speaks down to Tetsuo. He doesn't really appreciate Tetsuo. Tetsuo is just kind of like, just there. And I think their relationship is really interesting because it kind of seems to me that that's part of the reason why Tetsuo behaves the way that he does later on, because he has never been in a situation where he's had control over the situation,
Yeah.
or he's had any sort of power over the situation.
Yeah.
And so when he gets that power, it just kind of consumes him completely. I mean, what are your guys' kind of thoughts on the relationship between Kaneda and Tetsuo?
I think exactly that. I think their relation. I found this whole film in general to be a bigger kind of, I don't know, to use a wankier word, an allegory for how. They make that joke about how, that's how serial killers are formed. Like when somebody's left alone for a while, or like somebody's bullied, and then they kind of, like you said, get that power, that taste of power, or what it feels to suddenly be in that position. And I feel like Tetsuo, the way he's treated by the rest of the gang, yes, exactly, he comes across as very insecure from the beginning. And that combined with just being neglected by the state, it just couples. And I find the other characters actually it's not that they fade into the background, but Tetsuo really holds your attention because he seems so kind of dangerously insecure right from the beginning.
Yeah.
You kind of forget about the others a little bit because Tetsuo definitely raises red flags right from the beginning, I would say.
It's interesting though with that dynamic, because I wouldn't say that Kaneda doesn't care about Tetsuo, because when he gets hit, when he drives into one of the little wrinkly old children, so test subject 20,
weird nana children,
test subject 26, I can't remember his name, but when he crashes into him and he obviously blows up and he's like injured and gets taken off by the government, sorry, very detailed spoiler, he's Kaneda actually really cares, he's like worried about him, so as much as there's that obviously like weird alpha beta type dynamic between them, I think they do care about each other. But it was what I also found really interesting is like when I because obviously it's the first time I've watched the film as an adult. I haven't watched it as an adult since I watched it as a kid, and when I was looking at like just posters and things like that, it was quite interesting that Kaneda was on the front. Like, I found that really interesting, because I was like, oh, he's the lead? Because I would have thought Tetsuo was like, we kind of study him more than anything, and I would have thought that, it's interesting that he's not on the cover of it. It's focused on Kaneda still, with him and his bike, and I found that quite interesting. I don't know what you guys think about that. Like, who would you say is the lead, and who's the supporting?
Well,
or are they both?
It's interesting, because when you talk about a lead character, you would argue that it was Tetsuo, but if you were talking about the protagonist, I would say that Tetsuo is the antagonist of the story. Although he's the focal point of the story, I would say that Kaneda is sort of more the protagonist. But again, I agree with Kira in that I think that Tetsuo is kind of a victim of his own circumstance, really, and of his own upbringing. You could argue that had he had a great childhood with loving parents, that he probably wouldn't have ended up the way that he did. But it seems to me that a great childhood with loving parents is just not a thing in Neo Tokyo. Because obviously we find out that in 1988, as I said, this massive kind of atomic bomb essentially went off and destroyed pretty much the whole city. So they've obviously spent quite a lot of time rebuilding, and they obviously have other priorities when it comes to rebuilding the city. It's not important, I guess, to the movie. I was just curious, is that when you watch this movie or kind of any anime, do you prefer subs or dubs?
I'm a subs.
You're a subs. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a subber. I like listening. I like the tone of Japanese being spoken, and also I find the fact that the lips aren't in time a bit disconcert. I get a bit thrown off. Yeah. So it's like I'd rather have subs. But I watched it this time with dubs because that was the only one I could find.
I watched it with subs because
I'm usually a subber, but I could only find a dubbed version, so it's the first time I'd watched it dubbed, and that was weird.
I watched subs because that was the only one I could find as well, so it was kind of what was available more than preference. But I agree what you mean, the tone of voice, it almost feels more authentic. You feel like, oh, that's what that character is meant to sound like, because with Kaneda, I get the impression he's supposed to be a bit of a charmer or a little bit cheeky, and you meant to go, oh, bless. So, like, when they are taking him by the police, like, he's a bit of a sharp talker, and he's a bit, bit of a scamp. Bit of a little scamp, and just to go back to, just very quick reference back, and I got this in the tone of his voice as well, is you're meant to kind of, I know what you said, he is technically the protagonist because he has likeable qualities, like he's got the girl he's kind of hankering over, and he's got the good heart, and he clearly means well, and he's a bit cheeky and a bit of a chappy, and yet he's somehow not as interesting a watch as Tetsuo.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because...
What about you? Are you a sub or a dubber?
Wow, thanks for asking.
Oh.
I was going to say, I actually put on Twitter, and it is genuinely true, that this is one of the only, the very few movies that I own on like a collector's edition steelbook, and I kind of went out specifically bought this collector's edition steelbook because I don't generally invest in steelbooks because they're really expensive and they're generally not really worth it. Sorry, steelbook collectors, but I genuinely don't see the point in them a lot. But for this movie, I kind of felt like I had to. It comes with like a little booklet. It's very sweet, but it basically comes with the Blu-ray and the DVD. And with the Blu-ray, it basically kind of just starts with dubs. And to be honest, I'm a subber and a dubber, and that's probably a bit sacrilegious, but I kind of feel like to get the genuine, authentic experience, I think you have to do subs, because I think, like you say, and especially with a movie like Akira, where they actually recorded the voice sort of before they animated, which is generally not what they do, but they wanted to get, obviously, the inflection and everything like that to animate it. But I feel like with that, when you're talking about subs, you obviously do get that, even though you can't understand the language, you can still kind of get the emotion that comes through from the voice performance. But when I watched it this time, it was the sort of newer English dub, which, to be fair, like I actually do quite enjoy.
It wasn't awful, was it?
No, it was actually quite good. And I know that there's a lot of argument between, like, subs and dubs, and to get the authentic experience you need to do subs. The way I look at it is you kind of do whatever suits you.
Yeah, right.
And if you... Because some people don't like to kind of read subs while they're watching a movie.
There's pros and cons. Like I felt like I was able to focus more on the imagery when I didn't have to read subtitles. Yeah. Which I'm fine anyway. I can focus on imagery, but I'm like, okay, I'm 100% just focusing on the screen and the images on the screen. Whereas I guess you're kind of splitting your brain power to be like read the text and see what's happening at the same time.
Kind of going like
which is fine. It's not impossible, but.
Yeah,
you've got that.
But so for watching it when I watched it, I watched the dub. But generally, I kind of do a bit of a mix and match. With Studio Ghibli, I tend to watch dubs, but only because I find that the Disney dubs are actually quite good on those. But it's very much, it just depends. But I'm kind of the opinion that, people should do whatever they want. No one's ever going to get...
right or wrong, is there?
Exactly, no one's ever going to get beef from me because they like dubs, for example, because the way I look at it is they're actually taking the time to watch a classic Japanese anime. However they want to watch it, it's cool by me. Yep. So I was just curious. So... We've already mentioned this movie is actually set in 2019.
Yes. And they've got the Olympics the following year. Obviously it all happens in the Olympic Stadium. And I was like, wait, they've got the Olympics also happening in 2020.
I was weird.
Shook.
It's weird, isn't it? It's like it predicted the future.
I know. I was like, did Japan, on purpose, decide they were going to do the Olympics in 2020 so that Akira fantasy happened?
Yeah.
I find it really fascinating when certain movies kind of end up predicting the future. Right. I know that people are obsessed with Back to the Future, aren't they? And when Back to the Future, when it was 2015, everyone was like, "Oh my God, it's like what's going to happen in 2015? Back to the Future," and nothing happened. No. We still never got hoverboards, guys. But we did end up with
a thing called a hoverboard, but it doesn't hover in any way.
Well, no, I was going to talk about the ginger-faced guy with blonde hair that ended up in power. But, Back to the Future. This is all your fault.
Brilliant.
But so the as I mentioned, the setting is sort of post-nuclear apocalyptic. But we actually find out in this movie that it wasn't, a nuclear bombing. It was actually this test subject named Akira, who destroyed Tokyo. But in destroying Tokyo, actually led on to a sort of a massive global world war, which essentially became World War III. So there are massive ramifications for these test subjects and what they were actually doing to these children. So obviously, we don't actually know much about Akira as a character, although the movie is named after him. We don't know much about him other than he had this immense power. It was uncontrollable, so obviously they couldn't control it, and he basically ended up destroying all of Tokyo. And to prevent it from happening, the other test subjects were sort of heavily medicated in order to keep their powers down. It kind of prematurely aged them, so they look really weird and old. Like Anita said, the weird wrinkly kid who looks like 40. They're continuously drugging these kids and trying to keep them under control because they don't want another Akira to happen. It's really interesting though, because when at the start of the movie you meet one of the children. I'm trying to remember which child it was. I think it was Takashi is who you meet, number 26.
Yeah, Takashi, yeah.
So Takashi we meet him because he's essentially being rescued by someone because we see this man kind of dragging him through the streets and he's injured. But I don't think we ever find out who the man is.
I don't know if... So, this is random. So, oh my gosh, I forgot her name. The love interest of Kaneda. Like, she mentions that they tried...
Okay.
Yes. She mentions that they tried to... Well, her boss, Ryu, I think was his name? Ryu, yeah. He mentioned that they tried to steal one of the subjects. And I thought the guy at the beginning got shot is one of them trying to steal one of the subjects. Because he mentions it in passing when they're in that room. Do you remember before they break in the sewer system before they all get in the boiler suits? He mentions it in that room, and I was like, "Oh, is that what's happening at the beginning?"
Do you know what? I am shook. Like, shook. No, but that makes complete sense because I always wondered who was the one that they tried to take. But that. Oh my God, we're learning stuff. That absolutely does make sense. I just assumed, I think, that they were trying, that it was like a rescue. Like it was like one of the scientists was trying to like rescue the boy.
I mean, I'm open to someone correcting me.
We
understood that.
We just don't know. Anyone who works on Akira, maybe you could enlighten us. I mean, it might be something that kind of goes into in more detail, sort of in the manga, maybe. Which, by the way, I've not read. I don't know if either of you have read the manga.
No, but I wonder how expensive that they are. Like, I wonder if it's quite a pricey manga. I mean, there's only 6. You say there's 6 volumes?
6, yeah.
I'll have a look online.
Yeah,
I'll read it.
I think it would be quite interesting. Maybe you should read it and then let us know.
Yeah.
Actually, the boy was being,
blank.
And then we can find out. But I can't remember what my point was.
Sorry.
But yeah, we're just going off on a bit of a tangent. It happens. We'll just carry on. So obviously the main thing with this movie, I think, is the visuals, because it's a very visually stunning movie. As I've mentioned,
oh my God.
It was. There are some scenes that are 24 frames per second. It's also full CinemaScope aspect.
Nice.
So it's 172,000 frames. So it's all hand drawn. There were 68 animators, and at the time it broke records for how much it cost. So at the time it cost 1.1 million yen, which I have no idea how much it is now. But if you take into account inflation,
5p.
So you times for like 14 or something.
Quite a lot.
Yeah.
And what I think is really great is we've talked about, obviously, Neo Tokyo is a city that has basically been built over 30 years. It's a very futuristic looking city. It's called Neo Tokyo, so you'd imagine it would have some neon in it. It has lots of neon. It's very kind of reminiscent of Blade Runner in the kind of very neon style. But then you kind of have all these beautiful kind of lights. But then down in the streets, it feels really dark and really dingy and dirty, and it feels like destitute, really. As I've mentioned, you kind of have this contrast between this sort of dark and dismal downtown where these kind of protests are going on. They're protesting against the government regime, but then you've got these contrasts with this kind of bright neon cityscape as well. And one thing that I absolutely adore about this movie, and to be honest, I have no idea how they actually animate it, but where you have, at the start of the movie, you have bike chases. And the bike chases are the lights.
The light trails.
The light trails are fantastic. I mean, they...
Very Tron-esque, right?
It's just, yes. Very Tron-esque. Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. And to be honest, I'd never seen anything like that. And I remember when I first watched this movie, just being, like, I think my jaw was on the floor, just thinking... This just looks incredible. This is like a movie from the 80s. And if you compare it with other movies from the 80s, it's just like, it's nothing like anything else. But I think that's kind of the reason why it's such a wonderful experience to kind of sit and watch. I mean, when we're talking about like the look of the movie, like what do you guys kind of enjoy kind of most about the look of the movie?
Oh, okay. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, this is a question that we have not prepared in advance.
No, I actually weirdly did think about this.
Same.
Yeah.
Do you want to start then? Cool.
One thing that I really loved about another anime, Ghost in the Shell, they both
Love
do this.
it.
I really
The
loved.
first one.
Yeah, I really loved, and it's the same with Blade Runner as well, is how scale and the idea of mega cities, well, you know, overpopulation makes these kind of these buildings are infinitely wide, and there's so many doors and windows you couldn't possibly begin to count them, and that feels quite jarring. But also the way they're illustrated is beautiful. I remember there's a bit in Ghost in the Shell where it's looking up through an apartment complex, and just all the different signs hanging down and balconies, and just the scale of it is dizzying, but it's somehow so beautiful. And I found that about this one as well, like with the hospitals, the kind of is it a military hospital, is fair to say, the kind of industrial hospital. You know, it feels like they're in corridor like 1 of a million, and like it's almost like
where he's kept, isn't he?
Yeah, it just feels like frighteningly big. And there's it keeps cutting to the outside of this building, and when you get, and there's like a dizzying sense of like how small the windows are compared to like the size of the building. And I love, that's one thing that it really struck me, is how the buildings are kind of the world the buildings create. I really love that about this film. And yeah, I don't know what it is about anime and like grotty dystopian worlds, but they make them look simultaneously so frightening but beautiful.
Yeah.
In terms of me for like the imagery, like I guess it was how the imagery was used in like animation, like how it was animated. So talking about the 24 frames per second that you mentioned, how some of it was 12, how some of it was 24, as well as I think the car chase scenes, I think they also used the same frame rate for a lot of the slow-mo scenes where they animated like really slow movements. Because I was watching that and I was like, that's not been animated to like the normal frames per second that you normally see, because there was like, so you could tell that they'd studied someone rolling off a bed, and then they were like, we need to copy that frame by frame, because it was just so fluid and so smooth. And that's quite a hard thing to do with hand-drawn animation, to get that fluidity. You have to fill in those gaps. And the artist did like an incredible job. There was a lot of slow-mo in it, of like really quite complex things when someone was like rolling off a bed, or like it was liquid. And I particularly liked, just like Ghost in the Shell as well, there's these montages which are just surreal. So, for example, there's a scene when Tetsuo is in bed, and he's like, oh, my head, and his toys come to life. And then they all amalgamate and form giant versions of his toys, and then they start spewing milk out of all their little toy holes, and it gets surreal. And I remember watching that whole thing, and I was like, I can see where Ghost in the Shell got a lot of this influence from, this kind of really surreal like experience and really like odd imagery. And it was weird because it was like, it reminded you when you had like a lucid dream, like watching it. So that's what I really loved about like the imagery that you saw. And I also really love fluid animation, and you know when he was like getting all gashy and fleshy and like he was spilling out, I just loved how fluid that was, and like how disgustingly fluid that was. But I really loved it because that's really hard to do as well. And so it was, for me, it was like how they used the images and animated them, and created some really cool scenes.
And the thing is like nowadays they would just use computers to do that. And I kind of feel like a computer can obviously make it look super realistic, like you know, if it's bulging flesh, you know, they can make it look like it's real bulging flesh. And obviously this doesn't look like it's real bulging flesh, but it's still so visceral.
Right,
You know, it's like you can feel every bulge. And you know, when it's like kind of spewing out of his arm, you know, you know, when it's like, it's almost like little, they're not like tentacles, but they're like, when their little things are kind of spewing out and kind of grasping onto the ground, you can really kind of feel it. Because it is, like you say, so fluid and it feels so real that, and it's a style of animation that I don't think has ever been surpassed. I mean, I'm very open to any suggestions of anyone listening who thinks that there's another, you know, whether it be anime or whether it be any sort of Western animation that can surpass the level of fluidity and just kind of sheer visceral quality of Akira, because I genuinely don't think there is, but yeah, feel free, let me know. I will watch anything.
At least I feel like a lot of people took that visceral feeling and applied it into other stuff. Because the moment, when, you know, when his arm starts coming out and it's like just disgusting, it like shoots out like out of his like chest, this massive gammy arm. It really reminded me of like Resident Evil, like where you'd have like some of those like weird, freaky old fluidy zombies. It really reminded me of that, and I was like, like, you know, it's kind of like similar. I wonder if they took it from there, or at least they were inspired by something from Akira. So I don't know if I think people might use the same feeling that Akira did, but I don't know if anyone...
I mean, we'll talk a little bit later about, obviously, there are many other movies that have taken influence from Akira, because it's obviously, you know, when we're talking about sci-fi, when we're talking about dystopian sci-fi specifically, you know, sort of cyberpunk sci-fi, you know, there's a lot, and obviously when we're talking about superheroes as well, there's a lot that's kind of taken influence from this movie. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was, obviously when we're talking about this movie, we're talking about a movie with, when we're talking about Tetsuo specifically, it's a story very much of isolation and fear. He doesn't know what's happening to him. He kind of wakes up in this room, as you said. He starts having all of these lucid dreams where things are coming to life, and he's petrified. Like, genuinely, if you woke up and your toys or whatever started like moving and walking towards you and being all happy and jolly, and then kind of formed this massive monster, you'd think you were going absolutely mad. But also, obviously, when we're talking about 2019 today, and we're talking about, you know, the corruption of power, for example, and we're talking about what fear can do, I think it's especially kind of poignant, because I think a lot of what's happening in the world, just generally, comes from not only fear and isolation, you know, feeling like you're not being listened to, feeling worried about what might happen to you or to your family, and also the people in power I don't seem to be kind of really representing the everyday people, and I feel like a movie like Akira is kind of telling that story 30 years ago.
It's weird, sorry to like, but it's weird because like when I was watching this, I was like, this, I know it's a different country, guys, don't worry, I know, but it reminds me, I was watching this and I was like, especially with some of the rioting and stuff that was happening on the street, and I was like, this reminds me of Hong Kong. This reminds me of the stuff that I've been seeing on TV with the Hong Kong riots. And it was just like really weird, and I was watching this Neo-Tokyo kind of with all these upset residents, the police are, you know, being unjust and like the corruption and stuff, and I was watching this and I was like, it really reminded me of Hong Kong, like what's happening now in 2019.
I had a similar, like, because I feel like this film is very poignant at the moment, and I watched this the day after I'd watched the debates on Channel 4 about climate change, and for those who don't know, Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage didn't turn up, and they are two people who are willing to put their own ambitions ahead of the climate and scientists. And there is a bit where the military general, what's his name? Hang on.
Colonel Shikishima.
Colonel Shikishima, and he says, oh, scientists are just romantics. They're basically, he describes scientists as fantasy, so he deliberately undermines, you know, the power and the understanding of science to get his own ambitions ahead. And I found that bit particularly, it made me feel a bit frightened because I was watching it and I thought, God, it is 2019 and I'm watching our Prime Minister do what he's doing, is kind of telling everyone, ignore the scientists, they're being ridiculous, they couldn't possibly understand. We're the practical ones, you see. Well, we really understand what needs to be happening here. And that made me feel very unsettled because I was thinking, wow, okay, watching my own Prime Minister do that.
Yeah. It's and I know we've obviously talked a little bit about how certain movies can predict the future, but I kind of feel like sometimes movies kind of put it out there and think, well, this might happen in the future. But I kind of feel like with this movie, it's almost like it knew. Yeah. That all that needs to, and I pray to God that nothing terrible happens, but is it going to take some, post-apocalyptic, thing to happen in order for something to change? Yeah. And especially when we're talking about things like climate change, people have been talking about things like that for I don't know how long, decades. People have talked about climate change, and there are still people out there who do not believe that the planet is getting hotter, despite all of this scientific evidence and all of these very clever scientists saying, well, here's the proof that the climate is changing. We're having all of these massive spikes in temperature, all of these kind of weather events happening, floods and tornadoes, forest fires. I mean, they're happening right now. Like in Australia, I think they're still battling fires. And there are still people who are like, climate change isn't real.
Mate. And I'm like, propaganda.
Are you not living in the same world that I'm living in? It's very clear that the amount of pollution that we're putting into the atmosphere is causing a problem. The plastics are causing a problem. We need to do something about that. And this movie is predicting that, and it's not predicting it in the same way. It's not saying, Tetsuo drank a bottle of Evian water and didn't put it in the recycling. But it's the same sort of principle. It's a mass global event is going to happen if we don't do something about it. And that's another reason why this movie is so incredible, because it is literally, and I really hope it's not predicting our future, because the future in this movie is not a nice future.
Did you get the feeling as well that they were kind of doing, again, this theme never seems to go away, is government seeing people as completely disposable? I felt the bloodshed in it was almost like with the military, the way they kind of fired at people was like, right, get them out of the way. And I felt like that's still relevant, depressing.
Like Anita said with the Hong Kong, I kind of feel like it might not have been Hong Kong. I'm trying to remember. There was some protest or something. It may not have been Hong Kong, but where they were firing towards protesters. And I think it was mainly I don't think anyone was actually killed or anything, but obviously, and I do fear that we're kind of reaching a point where, people are allowed to peacefully protest as long as it doesn't cause any issue for the government or for the state or for the police or anything like that. And as soon as people start to protest because they're really angry about what's going on, it's all of a sudden you can't protest, you can't say this, you can't say that. But I kind of feel like people need an opportunity to kind of vent their frustration and their anger with what's going on in the world.
Also, low key, right? The general guy, was that a coup? Because I was like, from a person, I came from a country that had a coup that was not a coup, but it was definitely a coup. Was that a coup? After he decided to be I'm just going to take you down and I'm just going to take matters in my own hand. Was that a military coup?
It must have, that's the implication, isn't it, really, if he's got a say.
But again, I kind of feel like that was a bit half-baked, because I don't think it ever kind of felt like a natural conclusion.
Because there's a bit round the table, and they're chatting to I'm sure the Prime Minister is present, or they're referring to the Prime Minister, and they say, basically the government is saying, we can't keep giving you more money. And the military's like, well, looks like you're going to have to, so...
Bit awkward.
But again, I do kind of feel like, though, that is such an interesting kind of thing to talk about when we're talking about a setting like Neo Tokyo, which is so politically corrupt. I feel like the movie wants to talk about the corruption in politics and how that kind of how that created Akira in the first place.
Why were they even testing
exactly on, but I feel like the movie doesn't really go anywhere with it because I don't think it has the time to kind of go anywhere.
And it was quite a long film for its time. It was like 2 hours.
I think just over 2 hours.
Quite long, right, for a film in the 80s. I didn't think films normally lasted that long back then.
Yeah, what I find interesting about that as well, that it's 2 hours, beautifully drawn. This sounds like a side point. You know the music video "Take on Me" by
I was listening to that on the way to the train station.
That was over 1,000 images put together to make the bits where she's cutting in and out of the cartoon world. How many pages in Akira then? Literally 1,000 for 3 minutes. Yeah. So how much for
2
hours?
I think you'll find I already mentioned it was 172,000. This is where Akira wasn't paying attention earlier.
Akira was not paying attention.
Go and sit in the corner, think about what you've done.
In the corner of SAMM's in Peterborough.
In the corner of SAMM's, Peterborough.
No, it's crazy. It's quite a long film for its time.
I definitely. I mean, especially when you're talking about an animated film as well, because animated films tend to. Well, they do tend to be focused sort of at children. This is not a children's movie. This is a movie for
I watched it when I was a child.
Adults.
Anita's like, and yet.
Oh, God.
She's still traumatised by that experience.
I used to watch The X-Files when I was little. I'm sure I shouldn't have.
There's a lot of films and games
The
I should have
X-Files was
played.
great, though.
It was Mulder and Scully. There was one where I remember these, and they had like no face, and I remember that still haunts me. Like I remember seeing that and going,
but I think that was kind of the point with the X-Files. It was to shock you, but yeah, I used to love the X-Files. Anyway, let's not deviate.
Sorry.
So where are we? Right. Okay. So I just want to quickly talk about. As I mentioned, this is essentially. It may not have been the first anime that most people saw, but essentially, I think back in the 80s, anime as a style of animation and Japanese movies in general, it wasn't really something that the West generally knew about. And I think this movie is credited with introducing that style of Japanese anime specifically to the West. Because although Studio Ghibli had formed, I think it was like 1979, I believe, off the top of my head, people knew about things like My Neighbor Totoro, but it wasn't really until Akira that people really kind of stood up and took notice of this kind of style of movie making, and specifically with Akira, the adult themes that and when we're talking about Japanese animation, obviously this is it's a movie for grown-ups. Like I said, it's rated 15. There are adult themes in the movie. I do think though it is a very good movie, not for young children obviously, but for teenagers. I think it's a really great movie to introduce teenagers to this style of animation, especially if those kids have grown up with Studio Ghibli movies like Spirited Away. It feels like a bit of a natural successor to those, because those movies do deal with very interesting themes, but this is very much a more kind of adult orientated theme. But it, like we've said, it's all encapsulating. It's very relevant to today. When we talk about this movie, because obviously we've not kind of gone through this movie plot by plot, because I kind of feel like if we did, we'd be here forever. And we are at SAMM's in Peterborough.
SAMM's.
That's SAMM''S.
In Peterborough. But we do have a limited time available, so we don't want to obviously go over our allotted time, and I feel like if we went through the movie plot by plot, we would. But when we're talking about the legacy of this movie, it's really talking about the evolution of humanity sort of after a massive disaster. Humanity sort of in recent times has gone through periods of sort of post these kind of disastrous events, and by that I'm talking about at the start of the century, humanity went through the Great War and kind of came out the other side, had to start rebuilding Europe essentially, and then shortly after World War II, which again was the kind of this massive world-encompassing event, which a lot of people kind of just had to rebuild from. But I think this movie, essentially, I think it makes us ask questions about really who we are and what our purpose is in life. When we've obviously talked a little bit about Tetsuo and about his story, the fact that he obviously has this power kind of latent within him, because if he didn't have the power, then he wouldn't have registered on I can't remember the scientist's name, actually. It kind of escapes me. But I think one of the few things that's computer generated is the little
music thing,
the little circle of light and loveliness, where it's very clear that he's registering a level of power, sort of post his the accident that he has. But it's implied that this power is kind of latent within him, and it's kind of all of a sudden come to the forefront. But I think when we're talking about his powers, which obviously manifest in many different ways, with the fact that he has like telekinesis, he can make things move, he can rebuild himself,
fly.
Yeah, he kind of learns throughout the movie about all of these powers, and he's kind of a little bit surprised each time. He's like, oh, I can do that, you know. But I think it kind of speaks to sort of humanity generally, and I think that humans generally have quite a lot of power within them that I think they don't realise. And when we're talking about this movie and obviously the themes, when we're talking about, obviously we've talked a little bit about climate change and stuff like that. And I think that a lot of people, because in the UK we're obviously when this episode comes out, we will have the results of the forthcoming general election. But as we're recording, we're a couple of weeks away from a general election, which will obviously detail going forward, whoever gets into power will detail how we live our lives kind of going forward. So there's a lot of pressure going on in the UK at the moment, but I can't remember the point I was trying to... I remember now. But I think when we're talking about a general election, for example, I think that a lot of people kind of have a vote, but they don't really want to use it because they feel like they don't have that power within them to make a difference. But I think what this movie teaches us more than anything is that you know, whoever you are, the power is within you. You just kind of got to let it go, but you've also got to use it in the right way. And I think that's with Tetsuo specifically. He gets this rush of power, and you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and he kind of goes from this kind of meek, quiet, bullied young man, and just kind of explodes, really. But I do think it kind of speaks to society. I mean, what do you guys think about that? Have I made sense with what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would also argue that Kaneda also is showing, because I mean, he doesn't have a single power, yet he's willing to keep chasing Tetsuo and shoot rocket or lasers at him. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, and he's obviously feels like, as an average person, he's kind of standing up to this superpowered best friend. So I think he's also quite a symbol of power as well, or like the power that you can have in yourself.
So it's going to stand up to the bad guy, and you know, even if it is your friend. Definitely.
One thing that I thought it brought up was, so in countries where, say, a power has just exited, so like say you had a coup, or like, you know, if we go back...
A coup that's not a coup.
A coup that's definitely not a coup, but is also a coup. Or like you go back 200 years and you had the British Empire, like Britain starting to leave, less time than that, Britain starting to leave countries and just leaving them as an absolute shit show, just not taking any responsibility for their actions. You've got a military power in Akira that's doing the same thing. It's just not taking any responsibility for itself. It's letting... And what it's always struck me is that when that happens, people are quite vulnerable to bad power because there's no power structure in place, so the worst can often rise to the top, or people are vulnerable to looking up to interesting people. And there's a bit in the film where there's a cult, and they're...
with the lady.
And the police intercept it because they're worshipping someone. I thought that was really interesting because there's no real power structure, you know, it's kind of a bit lawless in a lot of ways. It's a bit like... I guess it reminded me a bit of Detroit in a lot of ways. Like I remember this sounds like such a tangent. Danny Brown, the rapper, said like Detroit is quite lawless in a lot of ways, so people just do their own thing and they find their own groups. And this reminded me of that in a way, in that what's his name? Tetsuo gets possessed by this power. And I thought that was an interesting kind of comparison, how people will, although that chooses him, he doesn't choose it. It's an interesting kind of allegory for people adopting an evil kind of idol, if you want, because they're vulnerable to that. Yeah. They feel like you have the potential to change things, and then because everything else is just a shit show, they end up choosing the wrong person because they think, they could do something, bring hope, and then obviously
he destroys the bridge and they all die.
And they destroys the M25 and no one can get to Peckham.
But no, I think you're right though. I find it interesting how Akira, not Kira, you went in it.
Don't blame me, I feel attacked.
I found it interesting how Akira started off as a thing, like not a person.
Yeah.
It was like an entity. Because some people described it as a god, like the cult that was there on the street. They described it as a god. The girl, Kay, is that her name? Kay?
Mm-hmm. Kei, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kay. She's in the prison with Kaneda, and she's like saying, "Oh, Akira's like an innate power that everyone has." She describes it
it's like
as
an
power,
energy,
like an energy. And then it turns out it's this boy. But it was quite interesting, like it was you didn't know what it was for a really long time, and it was like this,
like a myth.
Yeah, like a myth, right? And I don't know why. Like, it was quite interesting because it obviously empowered a lot of people to have this god that they followed, or this internal energy that they called Akira. And I don't know what my point was, but I found that interesting.
No, it was. It is really interesting, and I think, you know, when certain members of society do feel like they're not being represented by their government, or, you know, they feel like they're not being listened to, then they will kind of they kind of turn to what they kind of feel like is listening, or like you say, and I kind of feel like with the cult specifically, they kind of worship Akira, not really knowing what Akira is, or you know, other than the fact that the tentatively,
I'm sorry, that was the most distracting thing I've ever done.
Kira was tentatively trying to spoon some rocky road. The table was wobbling. There
was a lot of drama.
drama.
I was like watching, just like, oh my god, what's she going to do? It's fine. Anyway, back to so they essentially, Akira is like this false god. But it's really interesting when we talk about the people will. Why are you going for the rocky road again? Stop it! Just pick
it up. Did you see what I did, Kira?
Yeah,
I picked it up.
So when we're talking about like when she's still trying to eat the rocky road. Can I please make my point? Shame. The shame bell on you.
Hang on. Do you know what? I actually nailed it. I got through the rocky road really easily, then I failed to get it on the spoon.
I didn't see that. That was a wild
You were like, this is... Are you going to military coup this rocky road? Just like, other forces need to step in now.
Look, you know...
Sorry.
You're really putting me off my stride.
Sorry.
Really interesting things, really important things.
Sorry.
No, what I wanted to say was, obviously, sometimes people, you know, when they feel like they're not being listened to, similarly to when you're trying to bite into Rocky Road, not listening to me when I'm talking.
Do you know what, I'm going to eat this like a Victorian, just have like a curtain up.
That's somehow worse.
It's making it distract more. There's been a long history in humanity in general of, let's just say, bad people getting into power. That obviously the society has reached a point where they feel like they've got nowhere else to turn.
Yeah.
And like Kira said before she started eating the rocky road, you know, the bad kind of rises to the top of the situation, and you know, we saw it with Adolf Hitler, for example, where people kind of saw him as obviously someone who they thought would make a difference to the situation they were in. Turned out he was an absolute dickhead.
Plot twist.
Spoiler alert. And it's something that we're seeing now, again, sort of in 2019. Mentioning no names, there are certain countries
Boris Johnson.
We said mentioning no names, Kira.
Well,
Boris Johnson.
Okay.
Obviously, our current Prime Minister is...
At the time of recording.
At the time of recording, hopefully we won't be in. But obviously Donald Trump as well is the sort of figure that I think the vast majority of people think, oh my God, like how did he manage to get into power? But he's obviously managed to tap into this kind of, these fears and these insecurities of American people, you know, in kind of the middle states, I think is kind of where he's predominantly very, very popular. It's completely ridiculous that someone like that is the leader of literally one of the biggest countries in the world. It's crazy to me, but this is not a political podcast. So
but no, you're right. It's the power thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the fact that, because I know we in Akira, right? So there was the atomic bomb, and you've now got Neo Tokyo. You don't really know how it's ended up being so bad, but it is just really bad. That's kind of where you're dropped into the story, aren't you?
Yeah.
Neo Tokyo is not great. There's lots of like terrorist attacks by rebel groups.
Yeah.
There's obviously bike gangs running rife because they feel like they have to take things into their own hands, like you said.
Yeah. Which again is really reminiscent to things that are happening now, you know, with terrorist incidents. There was one literally yesterday in London with a guy who was, you know, randomly like attacking people in London. I mean, obviously bike gangs, not really, but you know, gang culture is a really big problem, you know, especially in inner cities. But these kids, obviously, they feel like they can't relate. They feel like the government's not listening. They feel like other people aren't listening. I mean, obviously, I'm not in with the gangs, so I don't know. I'm just speculating how I think they think. But it seems to me like these are generally kind of disadvantaged kids, like Kaneda and Tetsuo, who really genuinely feel like, what has the world got to offer them?
It reminds me a little bit, again, this is a little bit tangenty. There was a hairdresser in Scotland I was talking to, and her dad works for electoral roll services, and so his job is to go around and encourage people to vote, and the SNP is massive in Scotland, as anyone in Britain listening to this podcast will know. And I remember her saying is in particularly deprived areas where the schools don't have a lot of funding or schools aren't doing well, or, you know, big council estates where the people are really desperately poor, is they feel like the government does not give a shit about them, and that's why they end up voting for people like the SNP. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think I actually quite like the SNP. I like Nicola Sturgeon, but because the SNP is a Scottish nationalist party, they're separate to Westminster, so they're going, well, they at least care about Scotland and us. Westminster does not care about us, but there's people in London in similarly deprived areas feel like, well, the government does not give a shit about us. So you will inevitably turn to a group of people who you feel represents you.
I guess in that story, fortunately, people who feel like that who are in Scotland have someone in a relatively powerful position that they can vote for, but in the world of Neo Tokyo, they didn't have that.
Exactly. But and then the cult that's specifically mentioned, and I know that the cult goes into a bit more detail kind of in the manga, I think, about the characters who are kind of in this cult who worship Akira as a god. But I think they obviously see Akira, this kind of myth, as basically like a bit like the second coming of Jesus for them.
The reckoning type thing.
That like this is the being that will save us all kind of thing. And not knowing that, you know, this is the being that caused the you know, the post-apocalyptic world that they live in right now. I mentioned in my notes there's a particular speech, I think we touched on it, in the jail cell with Kaneda and Kay, where she basically talks about amoeba and and I think that's a really clever way to sort of show the power that Tetsuo and by extension Akira and all of the other test subjects kind of have access to, because it basically says, you know, if you're an amoeba and, you know, you live your life as an amoeba, I don't know the quote off by heart, I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, and then you get the powers of like a human being, then what does that do to you? And obviously the way I look at it, it's the easiest way to kind of understand the corruption of power that can occur when you kind of go from like mere mortal being to a being on a higher level, you know, a higher level of existence.
I've always had a theory about that as well, where I feel like it is that's quite so interesting you brought that up, because I think we were talking about it as well a little while ago. I have a theory where it's like, what happens to someone who's been close to dirt is suddenly given the step ladder to get up to the top and be powerful. What does that do to that person? How do they deal with the power? So it's really interesting that they talked about that. You brought up that quote. Sorry, just thought I'd chip in.
No, that's fine. You can chip in whatever you like. That's why you're here.
I think you're right though. I think you definitely do get people. It's like I think this was something we were talking about earlier. Is like with class, like you get either like say you come up from a working class family and you grow up with not much money and you suddenly have money. Either you go, I'm going to help people who are like me. I'm going to pay my taxes. Or I'm going to like pay my taxes. I'm going to help do projects to help other people. Or you become those people who live in Essex, who just like, no, it's mine now. I'm going to vote Tory. I'm not going to pay tax. I'm going to, you know.
Well, it's just like coming from a post-colonial country, and when you look across the continent, like Africa, where a lot of them are post-colonial, and pretty much, I would confidently say like 90, probably all of them to be honest, are all corrupt. And you wonder if it's because of, like you said, you've been the scum of the earth and suddenly you're able to be a president of that country, and what does that do to you? You hold on to that power, you hold on to your money, you hold on to like not wanting to share it with the people, which is like what you mentioned with that amoeba quote, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, because that was, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, Robert Mugabe.
Yeah.
Because I think he's kind of the prime example, isn't he, of a guy who probably pretty much started out with nothing and then essentially kind of became this incredibly wealthy man, and literally all of his subjects had nothing, and he had everything.
Yeah.
I think he's dead now, isn't he?
Yeah, he died. Yeah. And that nobody went to his funeral. I'm joking. I wasn't there, girl.
Sass. Oh, right now.
Sorry. Yeah, but no, that's really interesting. I actually didn't pick up on that. I heard obviously the speech and I registered that, but I didn't register it until now. You brought it up again.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my god, yes.
Oh my god, Rebel Dioramas.
Oh my god. You're like opening up my mind.
Bear in mind, listeners, before we started recording, we were literally just like talking in American to each other. Like,
oh my gosh. Look at her back.
Yeah.
Quoting Baby Got Back.
Yeah,
it's now Baby Got Back crossed with you have nothing to lose but your shackles, comrade.
Brilliant.
And the only other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was, obviously, when we're talking about the test subjects, so when we're talking about Tetsuo, and then you have Kyoko, Masaru, and Takashi, and each of them, they obviously have their individual powers. They kind of can bring their powers together, create hallucinations. But essentially, these children are test subjects, and they are controlled sort of by these scientists and by extension this government. And essentially, they're being kept locked up, they're being kept under control, they're being fed drugs. These kids are not free to do anything. They are, they're captives, basically. They're constantly being experimented on. And, but when you see, obviously, what happens to Tetsuo, obviously, when he actually ends up escaping, and as his powers kind of continually manifest, it gives you a really good indication and idea of why the government and by extension the scientists were actually trying so hard to kind of keep them under control, because they created these beings obviously over time, and they couldn't control Akira, and Akira ended up blowing up Tokyo. So they've created these these beings by way of experimentation, and now they have to kind of keep them, but they're like constantly just pumping them full of drugs and just trying to control them. And essentially, these are children. These are young children who have been captured. I mean, we're assuming they have no family. We're assuming they're orphans, like Tetsuo. But we never kind of find out much about them. But I think it's really sad that these kids, they don't have a life. They're literally prisoners. And I just think it's really sad. I just wanted to mention that. I think it's really sad that these poor children they're never going to be free.
I also wonder if they want to leave as well, because I don't know because they saw Akira and they saw what happened. Like, where it's that standpoint, they maybe they feel like they've got this massive responsibility where they might want to leave, but they can't. But they know if they do leave and stop taking their medication, this could happen again. I don't know what their viewpoint on that is.
I feel like they're kind of like a product of, again, that thing of the government sees anyone that isn't the government as disposable. I guess these kids, it's kind of like it just reinforces that kind of ruthlessness of they're small kids, but it doesn't matter. They're still just test subjects.
Yeah, they're just commodities, aren't they? They're just... And I think that kind of, by extension, just is this kind of divide between sort of the government and the general population of Neo Tokyo. Is like we've said, the population is expendable. Like, they will beat someone up, they will shoot someone who gets in their way. They literally don't care about the human population of Neo Tokyo, because they're at their level, because they are the government. And to be fair, that when the government, they don't even care that much about the scientists, the actual people who are looking after these children.
Definitely.
Like, they still kind of see them as like lesser beings. It's almost like the government are talking to, they're not conversing with other human beings. They kind of feel like they're so above everything else. But again, it just kind of speaks to modern society, really, and that governments are so out of touch with everyday people, because especially in the UK, several years ago there was quite a lot of talk about politicians who had like second homes, and because a lot of like taxpayers' money was being used to fund their extravagant
duck houses.
Exactly, duck houses, very famously duck houses. Their extravagant lifestyles, and then you've got people nowadays who are relying on food banks to feed their children.
Below the poverty line, technically in poverty.
Exactly, children are growing up in poverty, but it's okay for politicians because their children are fine.
Can I put in a galling fact? I believe there are more food banks than there are McDonald's in the UK.
What?
That's mad, isn't it?
That's crazy. But there are like hundreds of McDonald's.
Yeah, that's
crazy.
Let me just fact check that.
Make sure you don't go and fact check the Twitter account.
No, because that's not fact check.
Don't go on the Twitter account to fact check that.
What?
I said don't trust the Twitter account of fact checker.
Is it not good?
No,
conservative thing.
Sorry, yeah.
Here, it's wasted on you.
Shame, Kira, shame.
I don't know what's happened.
As Kira checks that fact, let's tell you about the wonderful place that we're recording in. It's called SAMM's in Peterborough. They have an upstairs with a bar, a downstairs where you can rent it out for music, or if you want to do a podcast like us, it's a wonderful place. So make sure you check out SAMM's at Peterborough.
Oh my god, that was literally not rehearsed at all. Like, she just did it. That was amazing.
Bars.
Oh my god, girl, you're amazing.
I think it's all mine.
Oh my gosh. Look at her bars.
Oh my god. Brilliant. Do you want me to look it up? Because mine gets working.
I'm doing it.
All right.
We're
being an absolute child.
The internet here is not... I mean, it's great. Thank you, SAMM's Peterborough, for your excellent hospitality. But the internet is not fantastic. So we're actually stealing Greg's internet next door, because theirs is a bit more reliable.
Oh, yay, Greg.
So I believe the McDonald's one was on Twitter, so I'm not digging through Twitter to find that one, but it is true. Town that has more food banks than supermarkets, and the more food banks in the UK than McDonald's. Yep.
Oh my god.
That's
so
crazy.
so that is the state of society today.
Yeah.
And that's why you need a government that can understand the plight of the real world situation that we're living in. Because, yeah.
It's great.
Anyway, I didn't intend for this to be the politics episode of the podcast, but
It was inevitable.
But the thing is it is completely relevant
Yes,
to the movie.
exactly.
It is completely relevant to the situation that the movie's in. We are in the same year that Akira is set in, and we're experiencing the same issues that Neo Tokyo is experiencing. It's just a little bit different because it's a kind of different country and everything like
Yeah.
that. So it's not kind of the same. We don't really have an Akira. Hopefully not.
Not so many violent attacks,
Hopefully, well, I mean, yeah, the situation is bad. Hopefully something good will happen. Really, I mentioned earlier that this movie has obviously influenced so many other movies. And I mean, the main movie that kind of comes to my mind, and I don't know if you guys have seen it, is a movie called Chronicle.
No, what's Chronicle?
So Chronicle, I believe, came out in... I haven't got internet, but I think it came out in 2012 or 2011.
Let me check for
It's
you,
a Josh
honey.
Trank
Chronicle.
movie.
Yeah, 2012.
2012. Okay. The movie Chronicle, I believe it was his first feature film. And it's basically about a group of young men, and they are basically dossing about in the forest, and they basically find like a hole, and they find something in the hole. It's like a power source, and they basically end up getting powers.
I have heard of this. I remember the
Yeah.
trailer for this film.
Yeah. It's a really interesting film. I don't want to obviously spoil it too much. It's got a great performance by Michael B. Jordan. I think it's one of the first films he was in.
Oh, I have seen this film.
Have you?
You said Michael B. Jordan. I was like, oh, I've
And
seen
you
it
were
then.
like, hell yeah, girl.
I'm like, Michael, how could I forget about Michael B. Jordan? Yeah, I've seen it.
He's a
I have seen
honey.
this. I know, right? I have seen this film then. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously it's all about how these three young men cope with the powers that they have, and about one of the young men specifically. He struggles with the amount of power that he has, and it ends up corrupting him. And it's a very similar theme to Akira. It's obviously not exactly the same, it's just a similar theme.
Yeah.
But it's obviously more of a superhero kind of led. Other movies that have been inspired by kind of the look and feel. You've got movies like Inception,
Yes.
The Matrix, which I've covered on this podcast, by the way.
Keanu Reeves.
And obviously we've spoken about other animes, like Ghost in the Shell. Also Cowboy Bebop, Battle Angel Alita, which was obviously made into a movie earlier on this year, called Alita Battle Angel. And also kind of video games as well. When we're talking about sort of old style, I grew up with like the old PlayStation and everything like that, and Metal Gear Solid was like a big game of the time.
I love
and Half-Life, and they're kind of got very similar kind of looks and feels. But I guess kind of when we're talking about the influence of this movie specifically, I mean, it influenced so many other movies, but when we're talking about anime specifically, I kind of think that people tend to kind of go to Akira as kind of the go-to recommendation. Like, or if you're interested in this kind of style of movie, just watch Akira. Why do you think that a movie like Akira is kind of more prevalent than a movie like Ghost in the Shell, for example? Like, do you think it's because of the themes of the movie or the look of the movie, or because I kind of feel like if someone said to me, oh, what anime would you recommend? I'd probably kind of go for Akira sort of over something else. And Ghost in the Shell is obviously an influence, more of an influence to The Matrix actually, than this is. But do you think there's a particular reason why Akira is just like the go-to movie, like for anime in general?
I would say, I think because Ghost in the Shell is not a little bit more odd, but it's because you're the main lead. She's like a cyborg.
Yes. Yeah.
She's not human, so maybe that removes the relatability. And I think with Ghost in the Shell as well, I feel like it's very, it's more obscure. It's more like just not weird, but it's just more obscure. So I guess maybe people think to recommend Akira because the story's really like it's not as obscure. It might be easier for someone to dive into.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it's just as simple as that. I love the visuals in Ghost in the Shell as well. I think it's really they're beautiful to look at.
I feel like the themes in Akira are a bit more universal, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, also maybe less problematic imagery. Ghost in the Shell, like her WAPs are out constantly. We're literally, like, I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, is this going to get tiring? Because I was like, I'm not into that, so I'm just like...
I mean, I was not bothered by it because I was like, she's a cyborg and like she needs it to use her powers, so I'm like, okay, I can get that.
It was gratuitous though. It was like hot woman, sexy tits, cyborgs, interesting tits. It seemed a bit like it did. I felt like there was a male gaze on that. Like I felt like I felt that dated badly. I felt that I was like, oh god. And I remember the person I was watching with at the time said, yeah, okay, it's a bit wapsy. Like just the tits are a bit eye roll worthy, but
maybe you've seen it as an adult. I haven't seen Ghost in the Shell in a while as an adult.
It struck me as being aged badly with that, just the male gaze side of it. Apart from that though, Ghost in the Shell I was recommended first. They were like, Ghost in the Shell you'll really like, and I did really like it.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I think, like I said earlier, when you're talking about anime in general, any anime recommendation is a good anime recommendation. So, I mean, obviously, if you listen to this and you've not seen Akira, then epic fail.
Yeah.
You should go and watch it because it's really, really good. But also similarly, I mentioned Ghost in the Shell quite a lot in the Matrix episode because there's a lot of similar imagery and themes in both Ghost in the Shell and the Matrix. And I know I recommended Ghost in the Shell back in that episode. So I'm going to recommend it again just because it's really damn good. I mean, I feel like
I really like it.
it's... If you do enjoy, I mean, and who doesn't enjoy The Matrix? I mean, come on, it's fantastic. But if you do kind of like that kind of questions of existence and who you are and what makes you you and all of that sort of stuff, then I think Ghost in the Shell is fantastic. I feel like we are running out of time a little bit. The soundtrack to this movie is kind of a mix of sort of traditional music and sort of a very kind of 80s synth, which you would think dates the movie, but it actually doesn't because
it somehow doesn't.
I really like the choral
really futuristic.
Stuff. Yeah, I really love the choral stuff because they did a lot of they got a lot of when I was watching it, I really noticed how they used kind of choral kind of grunts and it was very almost not tribal, but very really ancient.
It does feel tribal.
Yeah.
But did you notice as well, the names of the characters are in the chants?
Oh no, I didn't know that.
So I was listening really carefully to the music, and I can't remember exactly where, but there's one piece of music where they're obviously doing these kind of very kind of tribal chants, and in the middle of it they're going like Tetsuo, Kaneda. It's really good. Yeah. It's really good.
I'm gonna have to listen to that.
Yeah, it's really, really good, and it's really oh my god, they're talking about the characters in the movie. But yeah, and it's phenomenal because it's very kind of 80s synth, but it feels very kind of futuristic. It feels like
Blade Runner's like that too.
Yeah,
the weird synth. How would you call it? Almost like a clarinet, not a clarinet though, but that weird, almost wind instrument synth sound they use in Blade Runner. It sounds old, but simultaneously futuristic.
Yeah.
It's weird.
It is weird.
Some good sound. I really noticed the sound and the music. I mean, in particular, I really noticed it whenever it was on. It really was just. I don't know, it really added to the scene.
Yeah.
I felt like I had goosebumps sometimes just because the music was just rising so much with what was happening, and I was like, fuck.
Because especially when it's kind of going to that climactic battle at the end, and the music is just kind of rising with it.
Yeah.
And it genuinely does kind of, and that, I know I kind of talked on this podcast before about the power of music and how music is used in film to kind of bring you really into that sort of scene, whether it be emotional or or just like an action scene or something like that, and how music can really bring you in. And I think Akira was a great example of how they use the music. They use kind of this very traditional music along with this very kind of futuristic music, and you would think it wouldn't work, but it really does.
It really does, yeah.
So yeah, the soundtrack is really great, and I think really the final thing that I wanted to talk about was for a long time they have talked about a live action remake. It's been talked about. I think for the longest possible time that a remake has ever been talked about. And I'm going to get my obligatory Keanu reference in because Mr. Keanu Reeves was mooted for this remake, this live-action remake of Akira, sort of all the way back. I mean, we're talking years. He was apparently up to play Kaneda. Obviously, he's since passed on that because the project just didn't go anywhere. Yeah. And now we're talking about a proposed live-action movie to be directed by Taika Waititi, who's obviously a very brilliant director, very funny man. He did Hunt for the Wilder People, which is a wonderful, wonderful movie, Thor Ragnarok, and I think most recently Jojo Rabbit. And I think he sort of signed on to do this remake. And I think it's now been postponed because he's now going back to do the next Thor movie, Thor Love and Thunder.
Which sounds like an album.
It does.
I mean, to be fair, I'm not being funny, but if it's anything like Ragnarok, you know it's going to be absolutely incredible, and you know it's going to have the most incredible soundtrack.
Yeah.
I am really stoked for Love and Thunder. But yeah, it does sound like an awesome,
an 80s
rock album. I mean, it's just incredible. But I mean, when we're talking about live-action remakes, just generally, and animation is so wonderful because you can animate anything. And that's the wonderful thing about animation is you want a guy to fly up in the sky, you can animate it. You know, you want a guy who can rebuild his arm, you know, from metal and wire, and you can animate that. There's nothing you can't animate.
Yeah.
So with this movie specifically, how do you guys feel about a live-action remake? Is it something you're excited about? Is it something you're apprehensive about? Is it something that if Keanu Reeves was in it, you'd be like, hell yeah, get me that ticket? I mean, it goes without saying, I think, that Taika Waititi is very keen to make it set in Japan. He's very keen to hire Japanese actors.
Because
post Ghost in the Shell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, the whitewashing gate of Ghost in the Shell was such a critical disaster and a commercial disaster and a disaster just generally. So I think it's really great that Taika Waititi is very keen to sort of keep it very in keeping with the current story. But yeah, I guess, how would you guys feel? Would it be something that you'd be interested in to go and see?
If they can make it look like Blade Runner, because Blade Runner I think is aesthetically stunning. So, you know, if they take from like other dystopian sci-fi films, I would be here for it. It would be easy to be purist, and there'd be part of me that would go, it won't be as beautiful as an hand animated version, but it might be beautiful for different reasons if it's done well.
My disclaimer: I have so much respect for anyone who does visual effects. I think that's a real art form. It's a real skill. It's incredible what you can do with visual effects now. I think the last 50 years, how they've changed. I'm always skeptical about live action versions of animated films, and I don't know if it's because of the purist nature of me, like you mentioned, Kira, where it's like I have such a love for animation that maybe biases me like massively, but I don't know if I've seen an incredible live-action version of an animated film yet, and I would like to be proved wrong. So if Akira 2000 and whatever year it comes out is the one that changes it for me, I'll be... Yeah, I don't know. I'm always apprehensive about it. I wouldn't say I'm excited, but I'll always be like, I really hope you do it well. That's kind of like all I really want. Because, I mean, Ghost in the Shell, the live-action one, regardless of the whole fiasco of whitewashing it, where I was like, really, you should have cast characters who fit that demographic better, was visually really beautiful. I really liked it.
It did have a very kind of unique visual style. I think there was some things to like about it. Yeah. But I kind of felt like the whole whitewashing thing detracted from it very much. Because I kind of feel like the arguments that they gave for having Scarlett Johansson in the role, it didn't make any sense.
No, it was stupid. It didn't have arguments.
Exactly, and then spoilers for the live-action Ghost in the Shell. And then towards the end, when she finds out that she was actually an Asian woman, you know, so it was like you find out that she's got this body of Scarlett Johansson, but she was actually an Asian woman. Yeah. And I kind of feel like, well, that kind of makes it a bit worse because you're kind of saying she used to be an Asian woman, but now she's Scarlett Johansson.
You're implying
as if it's like better. You know. And I kind of feel like that was a big mistake.
If I took out all that controversy with it and I was to look at it just to be like, okay, this is an adaptation of a film, regardless of their casting decisions. But it did. When I watched it, I was like, wow, some of the stuff was like really reminded me of the feelings I got when I watched the anime. So I was like, I know you can get there. You can replicate some of these moments that we've talked about when we watched the anime. So I would never say I'm really excited about it, but I'd always be like, I really hope you do it well because
it deserves it.
It needs to be done well. It needs to be done right. So I'll be interested to see how it comes out.
Yeah, I definitely think that. Well, I guess like you, I always feel a bit apprehensive because animation, because I love animation so much, and I just feel like it's the in thing to kind of take your animation and make it live action, and that's obviously something that Disney are doing a lot of at the moment, to kind of varying degrees of greatness. You know, I kind of feel like a lot of it is a bit more of a cash grab than we've got a really good story to tell, let's tell it in live action. So I'm very hopeful that something like Akira, which is so relatable and such an interesting topic to kind of talk about, even when it comes out in like 4 or whatever years' time, I think it will still be an interesting thing to have as a live action. I think nothing will ever compare to this and what this is and how beautiful it looks and just how much kind of went into it. You know, there's and I think that's the problem, is when you have something that's so great, a live action's never going to make it any better. You're always going to have this kind of impossibly high standard of animation and storytelling, and I do kind of wonder that yes, it's a good idea to kind of have this excellent director come in and to say, yeah, we're going to make sure that our cast is you know, reflective of Japanese society, and you know, we're going to make it as great as we possibly can. But I kind of feel like it's a bit of an impossible task. But I mean, if Keanu Reeves was in it, I'd be like, give me that ticket right now.
I was just going to say, I wonder if it'd be curious to get the opinion of someone once this Akira live action one does come out, who's watched the live action first, then watch the animation.
Yeah.
Because I think I'm biased. I watch the animation first.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm always there's gonna be a level of nostalgia. There's gonna be like, your first experience was this form.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting in a few years' time.
But I think it is good though, because I think that in a way of, you know, younger people, introducing them to this movie, you know, it's coming out, it's got a very well-known director who a lot of people respect a hell of a lot, and I think it's going to come out, it'll probably do really good business, and it will kind of introduce younger people to this story. And I suppose that's a good thing, because then they'll go back to the anime and perhaps the original manga and really kind of respect the source material a little bit. So I think from that point of view, it probably is a good thing to kind of have that refresh of the themes and the topics that this movie talks about. I mean, I guess it's one of those, we'll just have to wait and see sort of what they do. I mean, it kind of goes without saying that Akira is one of the most successful anime movies ever. It was essentially made for the equivalent of $9 million, and it made $49 million. That is just like the cinematic release. It doesn't take into account things like, you know, DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff like that. I mean, it was a phenomenal success, and it kind of paved the way for other anime movies that came after it, and generally kind of the West's love of anime. And I mean, anime, it's all encompassing. There's movies about anything and everything. There's TV shows about anything and everything is kind of covered by anime. It's not just science fiction. There's all sorts of things. And I think you can even get like dedicated internet TV channels. I think Crunchyroll is one that does quite a lot of anime and stuff. So there's all sorts of stuff out there. So it's very difficult to kind of recommend, oh, you should go and watch this. But yeah, Akira is so wonderful, and it's given us so much. It's given us so much joy to kind of talk about this movie, but also kind of going on from the legacy of this movie and what this movie has given us all, you know, especially kind of here in the West, where otherwise I don't think we'd, you know, it would only be a small kind of subsection of people who kind of have access or know about, you know, maybe people who visited Japan would kind of know. But the fact that this movie came out was so big and so brilliant, you know, it really has kind of opened up a whole new world of absolute wonder. And it kind of goes without saying that I think anime is the only hand-drawn animation that's kind of still really being done. Hand-drawn animation is pretty dead now. It's only really in Japan, I think, that they're still keen on. They still do CGI and stuff like that a lot, but the hand-drawn stuff is really predominantly Japan that's kind of still kind of leading the way on that. So, and it truly is a really wonderful art form and so expressive as well. Now, at this point, I normally do social media thoughts on a movie, and I normally go to like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whoever's kind of commented. However, because I'm recording this quite a lot in advance, no one knows, apart from us three, that we're doing Akira. So I don't actually have any. So I think we've kind of come to the end. Unless you guys want to say anything else about Akira right now? What?
I think we covered everything.
Yeah! Woo! Obviously, Anita, Ciara, thank you so much. The name, the collective Akira.
The Akira
in person.
Yeah. In person. This is like the only interview
we've been Akira this whole time.
They genuinely have been Akira this whole time, and no one knew.
And we really know how to control our power.
We're responsible for all the Nana children running about in Peterborough.
Nana children.
And at SAMM's.
Oh my god.
So obviously, have to say a massive thank you to SAMM's in Peterborough for letting us have this wonderful kind of basement cellar space. It's a bit echoey, but it's really cool. And they've let us have it for free as well.
Yes, they've been incredibly lovely.
And yes, they've been so accommodating and wonderful. So if you're in Peterborough, go and see SAMM's.
Go and see SAMM's.
I think they do like coffee, cake, drinks, all sorts of
Yeah.
stuff.
They've got, coffee,
I think they've got live music in a bit as well.
So they support a lot of comedians as well. Like they have a night here run by Harrison Saul, so-called Pear-Faced Comedy, and if you're like a local band wanting to put a night on, they'll do that here. We have to get out before 7 because the band is coming in.
Yes.
So they support local culture, which is always a lovely thing.
Yes.
Thank you, SAMM's, you babes.
Thank you, SAMM's. Right, okay. Thank you, Collective Akira.
Oh, thank you.
For coming on Verbal Diorama. It's been such a joy. It's been so wonderful to meet you guys and we've had such a wonderful day.
It's been lush.
It's been so much fun. Like we've laughed so much, and it's been. You guys are the first podcasters that I've ever met in like real life. Oh my god!
You've like broken your podcasting virginity, and I think you have too.
Have I?
Yeah, we
Oh, that's true. Actually,
God, we were all virgins, and now we're not virgins anymore.
You were like first.
Obviously, I want to give you guys the opportunity to plug your excellent podcast. Let everyone know where they can find you on social media and stuff.
Take it away, Ciara.
So, on Facebook, we are just the Unexceptionals podcast or the Unexceptionals. Now, you can actually search the handle on Facebook as well as just typing in the Unexceptionals. And the handle is @_Unexceptionals, which is the same handle for Twitter and Instagram. And we will come up immediately. It's a little beautifully illustrated word Unexceptionals by Anita's lovely brother Calvin Mube.
Nailed it. Sorry.
Yes, Calvin, yes!
Yes, Calvin! Nice! It's sort of like turquoise, like aquamarine, and...
It's like a real fantasy.
Yeah, it's the full fantasy. You'll see it, you'll be like, that's the full fantasy I was expecting.
Yeah.
And if you ever want to get in contact with us, we are the Unexceptionals podcast @gmail.com.
Of course, yeah. If you ever want to say anything, you want to guest on the show, or if you just want to tell us, guys, you need to stop doing this.
Yeah, I listened to Verbal Diorama, and I just thought these people need to stop. Whatever it is they're doing, stop it now.
But yeah, no, thank you so much, though, for having us.
Thank
you so
much. It's been amazing, you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone for listening. Next episode, to be honest, I don't know. I've got a good idea of what it's going to be, but I'll add it in later. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye!
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 Bye, everybody!
Woo, okay, we're back in 2020. Thanks for that, past me, and past Anita and past Ciara. Welcome back to 2020. So basically, we've established time travel is not a myth. It's real. It just happened. It was very haphazard, but it's fine. It's okay. That is live recording. That is what live recording is. Obviously, thank you to Anita and Ciara. We really did have the most amazing day together. And look out for me featuring on season 2 of their podcast, The Unexceptionals. I think they really needed someone truly unexceptional, and I completely fit the bill. As I mentioned, thank you for listening. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Akira, and make sure you subscribe and listen to The Unexceptionals as well. Before I announce the next episode, I want to tell you a little bit about Off-Screen Babble, which is hosted by our Patreon producer Sade and her husband Kyle. You probably know by now that they're great, but did you know that they just released an episode on the Golden Globes? And did you know it came out a mere hours after the actual event? And that's what's so amazing about Off-Screen Babble, because the sheer dedication that Sade and Kyle have, I don't know of any other podcast that turns around live event episodes as fast as they do. So you can listen to Off-Screen Babble by searching for them in your podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and you can find them at offscreenbabble.com or Twitter, Instagram and Facebook at Offscreen Babble. So the next episode, obviously our patrons, Sade, Simon, Hardiel and Claudia already know this as they get the upcoming schedule. But for the next episode, we're going to be staying in Japan, except we're going to be going back a few years to feudal Japan for the absolutely beautiful stop motion Kubo and the Two Strings, which is by the aforementioned Golden Globe winning studio Laika. They just won for Missing Link, but they should have won for Kubo because it's glorious. So Kubo and the Two Strings is the third movie in the animation season, so look out for that in your podcatcher very soon. If you like this episode, I've also done episodes on Titan AE, Captain Marvel, Dread, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow, Pleasantville, The Cabin in the Woods, Speed, Aladdin 1992-2019, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, X-Men Dark Phoenix, Charlie's Angels 2000, The Mummy 1999, The Matrix, John Carter, Willow, The Iron Giant, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Logan, Edge of Tomorrow, Legally Blonde, Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 4, Episode 10, Hush, Mystery Men, Passengers, Stardust, Constantine and Arthur Christmas. Whew. I think I'm getting faster each time I do that, but I think I have to get faster because the list is getting so much bigger. And they can all be downloaded wherever you get your podcasts from. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and Letterboxd at Verbal Diorama. You can email me general hellos, feedback or suggestions, verbaldiorama@gmail.com. Website is verbaldiorama.com. And obviously, if you like what I do and you want to leave me a great review, you can do so on iTunes or over on Podchaser, and that would be really appreciated. You can sign up to support the show now at patreon.com/verbaldiorama. So tiers are Keanu themed and they start from $2 a month, and you get some fab perks, including, as I mentioned, access to the upcoming schedule. You get a shout out on the next episode and Twitter. And it basically goes all the way up to producer level, just like Sade. So I actually do have a new patron. So I have to say thank you to my new patron, and his name is Simon Brew. And you may have remembered that I've mentioned Simon Brew on the podcast before because he's been wonderfully supportive over the last few months. He's now a Johnny Utah patron, and he is the editor for Film Stories, which is the magazine that I do a little column for. I am incredibly grateful to Simon pretty much for everything over the last few months, but obviously also for becoming a patron as well. I was not expecting it, so I'm very grateful for that. Obviously, I've mentioned Film Stories magazine. I have a column over there. It's an independent British movie magazine. I talk about it every episode. I would love it if you would support that magazine because there are so many wonderful people, not just Simon, who work on that magazine, so many wonderful writers. It's just such a wonderful place. And if you do want to support the magazine, you can do so at filmstories.co.uk/magazine. You can purchase one-off copies. You can subscribe. Obviously, I currently have a column where I talk about independent podcasting, and I recommend a great independent movie podcast. And I'm also currently doing bits for Film Stories Online where I recommend great British movie podcasts. So obviously keep an eye on Film Story's site for that. And I guess final thoughts on this very special episode of Verbal Diorama on Akira. And that would be, open up your eyes and look at the big picture. You're all puppets of corrupt politicians and capitalists. Don't you understand? It's utterly pointless to fight each other. Wise words, Colonel Shikishima. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Movies you know.